Hi, everyone. I'm George, CTO at BABB, and welcome to this AMA session. I'm going to be taking questions today about our technology, our product, or even myself or my experience if you're interested. So I'm going to start taking them as they come. So let's start with Chris. This is a question that we get very, very frequently. Ultimately, we see no reason why we would have any issues getting BACs approved on partner exchanges. But reality is that we can only get so far without the main sale being over and without our token published. We're just finishing the security review. And yeah, this is a process that will continue for the next couple of weeks. We'll keep you updated as we get further news on this. Essentially, we're contacting more than a dozen exchanges. Yeah, and we'll keep you posted. So let me get the next one. So Michelle, this is a great question, and in fact, one of the low-hanging fruit use cases for BACs once you have an account open would be that an exchange implements a connection to the BABB blockchain, so they can also take in fiat funds. And then with multiple exchanges using it could help solve issues with arbitrage and with moving funds around, fiat funds around. So from a technical perspective, there's no reason why this wouldn't be the case. Then it's obviously part of the business model of each exchange, whether to support it, direct connection to fiat over cryptocurrency or not. So we definitely see the use case. You're mentioning here whether the different fiats on BABB issued by BABB. So with BABB being a bank, the fiat currencies are always issued by the bank. And with BABB being a bank, BABB will hold a fiat reserve account with the central bank, like all other banks, except that we do not load funds out, so it's a full reserve account. But yeah, the fiat funds will be funds that are held by the BABB, the bank entity, but held at the respective national bank account that BABB holds with the national banks. As for further details on the blockchain we're working on, it will be a few months. I won't lie, it will be a few months before we start publishing anything to a wider audience. Stay tuned on our Telegram channel. We'll very likely announce our technology previews over there to get immediate feedback from people. So yeah, we'll keep you posted on our roadmap as we move forward. So another question. Chris, you mentioned here the name of VCs. We're not in direct conversation with VCs. We're talking to everyone at the moment. The post you referred to was on one of our road trips. It's not really something that is relevant for this conversation. Victor, this one of the challenges, and this is more out of my scope, so I'm not as focused on the business side. We recognize the interest and we recognize the opportunity across multiple countries. With India, I have some experience working with India. The reality is that there is a certain degree of capital controls for sending rupees out of India. So the regulatory landscape is more complex than in Europe, which is where we're starting. So we'll for sure keep track of these opportunities as they come along and continue to develop relationships with interesting partners and conversations with regulators and central banks. Okay. Martin. So the BABB app will be actively promoted in both stores. It is a mobile first experience that we're designing and optimizing for. Our goal is to focus on the simplest use cases first. That there will not be any fancy features, because to begin with, on our first launch, the focus is on getting people to actually be able to load their funds from other bank accounts or from other places where they have funds into the app, and then be able to transact over our blockchain with fiat funds. That's going to be our focus when we start, and then we'll continue the development process and adding additional functionality, and continue to update it on both simultaneously for the iPhone and Android hardware. So let me see. I don't see a lot of comments in here. I'll be waiting for additional questions. It's already begun. Nope, not a recorded video. So pretty good question. I work closely with Paul, our CIO, to define both the business continuity plan, our risk analysis, our ITDR, which is part of the business continuity. Right now, the plan is to have, so we're building various pieces. So some portions are more centralized, others are to essentially power our blockchain. To begin with, everything is cloud first. Our centralized components are all built with containers and with the ability to spawn additional ones when the load requires. We're giving thorough consideration to issues of scalability and high availability of our services, with an eye on being essentially, once we're up and running, essentially continuous operation. So I hope that answers your question. Well, I'm waiting for more questions. By all means, go ahead. Well, BABB as a project, it's really hard to figure out when the project itself will be finished, because there is a lot of room to grow. So every country, so outside larger areas like Europe and China and the US, every country we want to go into will have its own challenges, its own integration challenges, dealing with the local partners, gaining access to the local currencies. So I don't know, I think I would say that the project will be complete once we cover the entire world. It will take a while. So yeah, still a long way for the project to be completed per se. And the nature of a project like this, it's never over. Once you're in operation, there's always room to grow. There's always additional things you can develop and build and scale. So it's very open-ended in that regard. I think, look, there's going to be a number of projects and increasingly, that try to do and attempt to do what BABB is doing. So the notion of tokenizing fiat funds and being able to transact fiat funds over the blockchain is not new. What I think it's important is also the market focus, because it's really hard to just try and go to the market and cover everything and everyone. So I would say that the team and the execution makes the difference, even though the idea can be similar. I mean, you'd go around and say every bank is the same concept, but they all offer their own spin on services. So I think the focus of BABB in providing the set of services that we have planned for the audiences and populations that we're targeting, I think that's what's going to make us unique and actually implementing it and getting it out there. Right. So let's say for instance that, and this is just an example. Let's say for instance that transacting in our blockchain requires 10 BACs. It's a transaction fee that in order to transact or to execute an operation, it costs you 10 BACs. Essentially, if you have the BACs, if you don't have the BACs, essentially we'll go out to market, take fiat funds from you, go out to market, buy those BACs in order to cover your fee. This is merely to facilitate the people not having to go to an exchange and acquire BACs, because we have access to the fiat funds from users. We can do that on your behalf. So there will be that purchase of BACs, and BACs will be used to pay for the transaction. That essentially means that BACs those 10 BACs go to a smart contract that essentially directs half of the funds. So in this case, 5 BACs would go to a reserve contract, and the other 5 would get burned. And then the reserve contract, essentially those 5 BACs represent our revenue for that operation. And essentially those 5 BACs will then, with time, be sold back to the market, which makes the BAC circulate. What's interesting here is that because of the ICO and because we are essentially funded for, or we will hopefully next Tuesday be essentially funded for a couple of years at least, we don't need to go out and sell those BACs to get a revenue. So we can afford to put those BACs into a reserve, and then over time, all the revenue that we accrued, rather than dumping it to the market, will over time release those funds back to those funds back to the market, with half already been burned. Hopefully this explains how we're planning on doing the reserve management portion. There's also a fine line between discussing general security concepts and specific initiatives. I can't really go into many of the details, but you can expect from us that we'll be running better than bank rate security, to the extent that cryptography, and we're designing the systems from the ground up, with encryption at its core. And with the goal here is that, and this might sound weird to a lot of people, but the goal here is that if we got hacked, the ability to actually do something with our systems would be very, very limited, because you're in control of your own private keys. So no one can really move those funds without your authorization. You'll be in control of your identity. So people can't really gain access to your identity details without your authorization, without going through your private key. So there are some aspects of the system that, by the nature of what we're building and how we're building it, offer a lot of mitigation to scenarios where part of the service could eventually be compromised. Of that, of course, we have an entire, how can I put it? An entire layout of where our services are operating. We build most of our infrastructure with microservices, with elements very contained, with very limited access and capabilities for each of these services, so that compromising a small piece of our infrastructure, even if that happened, the impact of that in our global infrastructure would be very limited, and we have those mitigation processes in place to prevent any bad outcome. So, Martin, great questions over there. Well, we'll be doing load testing for sure initially. Our initial estimations point, or our initial tests with our prototype system last year show upwards of a few thousand of transactions per minute throughput. This wasn't optimized. It wasn't optimized for our use case. It was merely using existing technology. You have to bear in mind that the system we're building and the ability to use a private blockchain implies that we don't have to rely on strategies like a proof of work or proof of stake, and we can essentially focus on optimizing the transactional activity. So I don't foresee at all that transaction throughput will be an issue on our platform. You're seeing a lot of actually public blockchains already moving up on their ability of processing of transactional capability, but that is even more so on private blockchains, where those concerns aren't really the same. That's whether the token will transform into cryptocurrency or will stay as a token. It's a pretty good question. Part of our goal is to implement BABB as a currency as well, primarily to make it easier to operate with funds in countries and geographies with lower liquidity. So if you're in a country where the whole economy is a fraction of the European or Chinese or US economy, the ability for you to actually engage and trade in that local currency will be very limited, because you need to have a counterparty to actually take those funds from you. So in particularly in those areas, and for fundraising and for international transactions, BABB will for sure be very useful. Whether using BABB as a currency to buy stuff on Amazon, we're still not there yet with really well implemented cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Bitcoin Cash, all those. You don't see them on large retailers like Amazon yet. So I think there are still ways to go on the ecosystem as a whole before we get something like that. Let's see. More questions. I'm not gonna speak to this directly. I think this is it's a very interesting topic, and is more tied not just with marketing but also with our go-to-market strategy and business operations as a whole. I'm sure we can tackle this sort of questions in another later AMA with people from our team that are actually more focused on this aspect. Right. So as I mentioned, peer-to-peer lending there's a lot of strategies for dealing with peer-to-peer lending. At this stage, we are still working on our risk model for that. So I can't really go into detail of how that model will work. I can tell you that when we launch in Q4 this year, lending is not going to be a part of this first stage of the app, because there is a lot of infrastructure, legal, not just technical, but particularly legal infrastructure to actually allow peer-to-peer lending. It will come in one of the subsequent updates. So we'll surely go back to this question in the future. Right now, not yet. So if you took a notice of the token sale agreement, it's a standard agreement for future tokens that happened during the pre-sale. Once we go through the main sale, we'll actually launch our token. We'll publish the contract. You'll be able to see the token on the blockchain, and within 2 weeks of the main sale finalizing, you'll be able to log into getBABB.com and choose to withdraw, provide an address of destination, and send your funds to an external address if you like. So not right now. Within 2 weeks, within 15 days of the main sale terminated. Right now, or we started our prototype, and we're working with Ethereum, with an Ethereum code base with proof of authority. It's pretty straightforward to set up. The interesting thing of running a private blockchain is that we can replace that technology anytime we want. We are also investigating other alternatives. We're constantly keeping track of evolution in the blockchain space. So right now, not proof of believability. I think that's, I've read a little bit about it, but I can say that there's a good implementation that we could actually take to production and define our roadmap based on something as recent. So for now, we're moving forward with proof of authority. And then, in a few months, we might choose to replace the technology if we feel that at some point something else works better. So I'm not entirely sure I understand the scope of the question, so feel free to rephrase it if I don't answer your question. So there's a number of considerations to be had when you're dealing with preventing fraud and safeguards, and you have to realize that BABB is operating under a regulated environment. So BABB will be a bank. It will follow all the safeguards and the regulatory requirements in order to deal with customer funds responsibly. In addition to that, the fact that it's operating on a blockchain, additional transparency, additional guarantees that the movements of funds were signed with your private key, and that you actually authorized that movement of funds, which is something that in traditional banking it's harder to do, because when you're sending funds to someone, when you log into your e-banking solution and you choose to send 100 euros or 100 pounds to someone, you're not actually sending it. You're asking the bank to send it on your behalf. With BABB, you are actually the one signing on that transaction and actually allowing that transaction to happen without an intermediary. So that in itself is an additional layer that prevents mischievous access to funds. Let's see what else. So Victor, let me see. So I'm not sure I understand the question exactly. We're looking to have BACs listed on a number of exchanges, not necessarily on. We may or may not have the ability to exchange BACs within our platform. Or actually, we will, but that is in addition to BACs being on exchanges. So in a way, exchanges in themselves are to some extent centralized. It's by nature of the fact that they have to connect with legacy money rails like the banking network. So in a way, they are centralized, but because there are many exchanges, they are distributed as well. So there's a certain degree of decentralization, even though the actors are centralized. In addition to that, you have the nascent field of decentralized exchanges. We'll explore all opportunities to provide exchangeability to the BACS token. Yeah, multi-user access it's actually it's not part of our primary use case. So we're trying to focus on not building technology for the sake of building technology. We actually focus on requiring a use case with identifying the actual people that will use it, estimating the market. In this case, multi-signature access. It's a staple of cryptocurrency security. For instance, if you have, it's quite natural that you could set up a system where in a family, the father authorizes any transaction made by their children, whether the child the person initiates the transaction and another person's family approves it. So there are use cases of that in a private and individual scenario, but also for as accounts where couples both have to sign, but also in a business environment where the control of who actually authorizes the movement of funds is quite relevant. So this isn't unique to BABB or unique to BACS, but we'll certainly consider those sort of use cases as we. So let me see a few more questions. Okay, so we are finishing the crowd sale next week on Tuesday. Once we launch the app, and once we start having users actually using the app and growing, there will be the need those users will need BACs. So as we evolve, or to begin with, we'll be getting those BACs from exchanges to prime the market and to push the demand to have these funds that we can sell in order to generate additional revenue to sustain us. When we say that we can sell them starting 2019, doesn't mean that we will. It will be a function of whether our funds flows and whether we see the opportunity to grow faster. But it will always be with consideration to not depressing supply on the market. So, or not overly increasing the supply on the market. The reality is that as more and more people start actually using the app, BACS goes away from being just something or something that you primarily speculate on and invest in its future, but it becomes an important part of a running system for people to actually use and consume. And as they consume it, BACS will get burned, as we explained before. A portion of it gets burned. So at that stage, we'll have the opportunity to take some of these bags that we have in this pool for sale and sell it to new users. That doesn't depress the market because it's new demand. So we have the opportunity, or we have the option, we maintain the option to make these sales that will not depress the market because it's in response to additional demand. These are not tokens that will, or we have no expectation to take these tokens and suddenly just go to the market and make a new sale at the market price. To be part of our ongoing activity. So it's not as if we're going to just take these and dump them on the market. That would be irresponsible of us. Very well. Any other question? Come on, I have a few more minutes and then we'll get going. Sveal, I think you just sent the same question again. So just to be clear, we are not running a second ICO in the future. It's essentially that we will have the ability to sell these tokens to generate revenue and further finance our activity, but only after we have additional users that actually generate further demand that we can meet by selling this token, not by going to market and depressing the existing market. Hope that clarifies that for you. Our projections are. It's a really tough question to answer. I can tell you what our projections are. Our projection for the end of the first year would be relatively conservative. We're very realistic with how hard it is to enter a market and how hard it is to scale. Our projections for the first year would be somewhere between 100,000 users. That would be our initial goal. And also with bearing in mind that the initial product that we'll launch will be this MVP that will then continue to evolve, and as we grow and as we add more functionality, the scope of the use cases and the people that we can actually solve problems for grows. So that helps scale our user base. In the second and third year, we expect it to grow exponentially. That is, it's not really a question that I have a lot of information on. We have some expectations. If I remember correctly, and Paul can talk to that a little bit more, but if I remember correctly, on our third year, we should start being profitable as a company. So it really depends on a number of factors, and particularly we may choose to forego some profitability in order to expand faster. So we're not really focused on just starting to become profitable and then resting on our laurels. Most of our revenue will be reinvested in order to expand to more markets and to meet more use cases. So profitability is a tougher thing to measure when you're reinvesting your profits to further growth, because on paper you're not being profitable. Right now we're in conversations with 2 other countries, and we've been going with processes in 2 other countries to try and figure out which one is the best. We're also aware of potential implications of Brexit. We don't expect that the UK will be shut off from the financial system. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Out of an abundance of caution, we're pursuing processes in 2 other countries. This will become public once we're a little bit further down the line. But essentially in other countries in Europe, yes. We're actually working on that now, on adding two-factor for our web wallet. And so what do you get when you go to getbab.com? Right now, it's going to come up in a few weeks, because we want to implement it before we add the functionality of being able to withdraw funds. So right now, all you can do by right now and logging into getbab.com is to look at your balance. Once you actually get access to that balance, we will implement additional protection measures. All right. I think if there's no more questions, this half an hour is up. You've suffered me long enough. So let's see how many. I can't really comment on the individual contracts of people. There are some provisions to that sort of problem. And to ensure that the people that are on board, the IP of the company is protected. Right now, the staff we have and the team we have is very committed to the project. I would think that some of them, or that those considerations are always in order. But I can't really comment on the details of the contracts. All right. If there's no further questions, I'm gonna be taking my leave. Feel free to drop additional questions here on our website, on our Telegram channel particularly. So we're happy to answer any questions. And that's it. I'm logging off for today. Feel free to follow up, and see you next time.